Although it's carrying its baby in a pouch on its belly, Kangaskhan is swift on its feet. It intimidates its opponents with quick jabs. The Pokédex, Pokemon Sword version. Welcome to another edition of Beyond Bulbasaur. Today we're talking about Kangaskhan. For a long time I thought of Kangaskhan as being one of the hardest Pokemon to catch in Gen 1, since she's only available to catch in the Safari Zone. In my original playthrough, where I made it to 143 Pokemon in my Pokédex, I had to use the Cinnabar Island glitch to catch her. For those who don't remember back then, or who didn't play Red and Blue, there was a glitch in the original games. Most famously, you could surf on the edge of Cinnabar Island or the Seafoam Islands, and run into the glitch Pokemon Blank or Missing Number to duplicate the 6th item on your inventory. In addition, you could run into random over level 100 Pokemon, and random Pokemon from the most recent area you came from. This last bit could be exploited to be able to catch Safari Zone Pokemon without having to jump through hoops of the Safari Zone. I never know if people listening are old school Pokemon players like me, or if some of you got into it later, or if you even played the games. So I'll quickly describe the Safari Zone. About 3/4 of the way through the Gen 1 games in the back of Fuchsia City, there was a sort of nature preserve for Pokemon. Lots of diverse and rare Pokemon could be caught there, but you couldn't catch them in the traditional way of battling, weakening, and throwing a Pokeball. You had to pay to enter, and were given 30 Safari Balls and could take 500 steps before time was up. Then when you ran into a Pokemon, similar to Pokemon Go, you would throw bait or rocks to keep the Pokemon from running and weaken them. This was probably one of the most difficult parts of the game if you were trying to catch them all. Flash forward to something like 2010 or 2011. I had long since sold off my original copies of Red, Yellow, and Silver version. The used game store wouldn't buy my Game Boy Color. But I was feeling that early longing for a simpler time. Plus, my girlfriend, who later became my wife, hadn't really experienced Pokemon growing up, so I bought us a copy of Red and Blue version to play together. The game didn't really hook her, but I instantly was 12 years old again. That said, I was smarter at 23 than I was at 12, and certain aspects of the game clicked with me in a way they hadn't as a kid. One of those was the Safari Zone. I remember one evening in particular where I was catching one Pokemon after another, Scyther, Tauros, and of course, Kangaskhan. The trick was to just throw the Safari Balls at them. Don't overthink it. In Gen 6, we finally got to see Kangaskhan's kid get out of her pouch with Mega Kangaskhan. Not too much to say about that, but wanted to mention it. And lastly, I wanted to bring up Kangaskhan in the Pokemon TCG Game Boy game. If you haven't played the Pokemon TCG Game Boy game and you're listening to this podcast, do yourself a favor and give it a shot. It's not super long, but it is very charming and simple in style, just like the Pokemon TCG itself. Kangaskhan is a really solid card in the TCG. I double-checked and it looks like the base set version is the same as the Game Boy game. First, she's a normal type, so her attacks all use colorless energy. This means she fits in decks of any type, since any energy can produce the colorless energy. The other thing that's great about Kangaskhan in the card game is that she's a fully evolved Pokemon who's also a basic Pokemon. This means she can just hit the board without having to find cards to evolve her. Her attacks are Fetch, which draws a card for 1 colorless energy, and Comet Punch, which has you flip 4 coins and deal 20 damage times the number of heads. In a game like Pokemon TCG, card draw is extremely powerful, so being able to play a Pokemon with 90 hit points to soak up damage and draw an extra card for a few turns while you power up your bench is pretty great. Like Ghastly, I don't know where the current meta or power creep is at, but if you got a Kangaskhan in the TCG Game Boy game, available on Nintendo Switch Online, you'll definitely want to include her in your deck. Well, that's all I've got for you today. Thanks for listening, and until next time, remember, you are the very best, like no one ever was.